Everyone. Well, thank you for joining us today. My name is Rain Mullings, and I'm a technical sales engineer at Desmet Ballestra, as well as a co-chair of the AOCS Young Professional Common Interest Group. Desmet Ballestra is a gold corporate member at AOCS and is very involved in the processing division. The processing division supports and the technical programming of AOCS annual meetings, several awards, and other divisions' activities, such as today's webinar for its nearly 300 members. In today's webinar, Alan Paine from Desmet Ballestra will focus on the question is, what is oil and where does it come from? In many companies involved in edible oil processes, there are a lot of the support staff who may not know as much about the business they operate and would like to know more about the basics. So this presentation will hope to present people who are relatively new to the industry and sometimes on the fringes, and help them understand a little bit more about the terminology that other people around them just assume they probably knew. So this is going to give a little bit of context on the industry as a whole, kind of more broader picture. Some learning objectives for today. We have 3 learning objectives you should probably try and focus on as you can walk away from with. A basic review of the oil chemistry. Second is what crops are used to provide oil and their place in the wider environment. And third is how the oil is extracted and processed. So Alan Paine, a little bit of background on him. He's been working as a chemical engineer in the industry since joining Simon Rosedowns over in the UK in 1984. Desmet bought that company back in 1988, and between 1995 and 2000, he was based in Desmet's offices out here in Atlanta, Georgia, where I am now. Probably have his office. Since then, Alan's been living in the UK, and he's been working for our Belgian office. He's currently responsible for the global technical support of Desmet Ballestra, and most of his work involves engineering refineries. But in engineering those refineries, he has to have a lot of understanding of other sectors and how they affect refining. He's traveled widely and visited many farms, plantations, palm oil mills, and extraction plants, in addition to many refineries. And most of you probably know him as he's a very regular contributor on Inform and Connect. Please, I'd like to remind you, if you have any questions during the webinar, hold them, type them in the box on the side, and we'll address them at the end if we have time. All right, without much more to say, I'd like to say thank you, Alan, for presenting this webinar, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Well, thanks very much, Lorraine. I just want to say for a start off that many of the unattributed pictures in this presentation come from pixabay.com, which is a very useful source of free pictures for non-commercial use. Pictures from flickr.com are used with attribution under Creative Commons, and I hope that I've credited everything else appropriately where necessary. So with the legal side taken care of, we shall proceed. There's a lot of information here, so don't worry if you don't quite get it the first time, because there will be recording available, and I'll also be making a PDF which will include notes that nearly all of the things I'm going to say. To many people, vegetable oil is a greasy liquid that comes out of a bottle in the kitchen. And before I started working in the industry in the 1980s, I didn't know much about that myself. But it's been interesting to learn more about that greasy liquid, although it's never possible to know everything, even in this relatively narrow field. The market value of vegetable oil produced in the world each year is around $100 billion US, depending on fluctuating prices, which means that it is an important business, but still only a relatively small part of the $2.4 trillion per year of global agricultural output.
Ah, você tá no fone. Então, beleza.
Background noise I'm hearing now. The amount of vegetable oil produced in the world is around 190 million tons per year. This is plenty to keep us busy, but not that much at all compared with the 4 billion tons of petroleum and the 8 billion tons of coal used in the world each year, which means that vegetable oil can only make a modest contribution to replacing fossil fuels without a huge expansion to the industry. In addition to vegetable oils each year, about 30 billion tons of animal fats are produced globally. Vegetable oils and animal fats can often be extracted and refined by similar processes, But in this talk, we're going to focus primarily on vegetable oils. The seeds and fruits of most plants contain oil, but surprisingly, around 85% of the vegetable oil produced in the world is supplied by only 4 crops: oil palm, soybeans, rapeseed, also known as canola, and sunflower. And nearly all the remaining 15% or so is supplied by cottonseed, coconut, peanut, corn, and olive. Let's first look at the oil produced by the oil palm tree. Towards the end of the 19th century, someone introduced the West African oil palm tree into what was then called Malaya as an ornamental plant. And it wasn't until well into the 20th century that it was recognized as a large-scale commercial crop. Today, the oil palm supplies over 30% of the world's vegetable oil, and over 80% of that comes from Malaysia and neighboring Indonesia. The growing of oil palm is very controversial, and environmentalists have condemned the industry, claiming that it is responsible for deforestation and loss of wildlife, especially the orangutan. Now, we can't say that producing palm oil or anything else for that matter is having a zero impact on the environment, but we have to keep a sense of proportion. When you go to Southeast Asia, it can sometimes feel that the oil palm plantations stretch on forever, but this is an illusion. In 2011, in Malaysia, palm oil cultivation was using 13% of the land, and forests still occupied 62%. Whereas in 2017 in Indonesia, only about 6% of the land was being used for palm oil production, which was much less than that which was being used for other types of farming, or the amount that is still forest. It's also worth noting that the oil palm is a very efficient crop, producing much more oil per hectare than any other commonly grown plant, and that the amount of agricultural land in the world used for palm oil cultivation is only about 0.3% of the total. Of course, we can't be complacent, and with so many people in the world, any human activity has to be carried out in the most sympathetic way possible. Many producers have joined the RSPO, Round Table on Sustainable Palm Oil. The RSPO uses third-party inspectors to ensure that members are working to their stated principles. Their goals include respecting small farmers, workers' conditions, and long-term conservation. If you want to delve more deeply into some of the many and various issues that affect tropical rainforests and the palm oil industry, then you might like to look at the work of the Centre for International Forestry Research, which has reported on, among other things, the role of women in the palm oil industry and small-scale farming and oil production. The webinar last month about chocolate also mentioned the involvement of women and smallholders in cocoa farming. So it's not just big corporations and men in grey suits. The fruit of the oil palm grows in bunches that look a lot like dates. Most of the oil, known as palm oil, occurs in the relatively fleshy, soft part of the fruit. The seed inside contains palm kernel oil, which has a distinctly different, here we go, has a distinctly different chemical composition to the palm oil coming from the soft material. Palm kernel, hello? No, everything is. Palm kernel oil smells rather like coconut, and both oils have a similar composition. Coconut and palm kernel oils are both known as lauric oils, and we'll look at what that means later. Oil is obtained from palm fruits on an industrial scale by a process involving sterilization using steam, stripping the fruit off the bunches, and low pressure pressing. The specialist equipment required is not used for obtaining oil from any other fruit or seed. On the other hand, the equipment used for winning oil out of palm kernels is similar to that used for other seeds. Oil can be expelled using high pressure presses and or extracted using solvents. And we shall look at the equipment for doing that later. Soybeans are a multi-purpose plant that, like the oil palm, supplies around 30% of the world's vegetable oil. In their native China, they're used as the green vegetable for making tofu and as the principal ingredient of soy sauce. Large quantities are now being grown in the United States, South America, and other countries where they are used for producing oil and as a source of protein, especially for feeding chickens. In the soybean industry, making protein meal is at least as important as producing oil, and we even find chicken producers running their own soybean oil extraction plants to make meal, feed their birds, and selling the oil as a byproduct. Sunflower seeds are familiar to many of us. The sunflower is a Central American plant which gets its name from its tendency to face the direction of the sun. The seed has a thin, hard cortex and a soft inner part known as the meat, which contains the oil. The inner part is also known as decorticated sunflower, and whole seeds are referred to as undecorticated or undecked sun. Canola is a type of rapeseed developed in Canada, and the plant grown as rapeseed in Europe and other parts of the world is the same thing for the purposes of this talk. Rapeseed canola is a member of the same family of plants as cabbage and is similar to mustard seed, which also is sometimes used as a source of oil. You have some background noise there. Right.
Sorry, Alan. This is Amy with AOCS. I'm not seeing where the background noise is coming from.
Oh, right. It's not coming from here, that's for sure. I will carry on. I'll carry on regardless. And as hey,
apologies, and I'll keep an eye on it. I may just really quickly run another mute pass and unmute you in just 1 second. But I'm going to remute the entire conference.
Okay.
Alan, you're now unmuted. Hopefully that will take care of anything, but we'll see. Thank you.
Okay, let's try keep going. I'll say rapeseed canola is a member of the same family of plants as cabbage and is similar to mustard seed, which is also sometimes used as a source of oil. If you live in a part of the world where rapeseed canola is grown, you will be familiar with the fields of bright yellow flowers that appear in the spring. Looking into the history of vegetable oil in Europe, it seems that prior to the 20th century, no one seems to have thought of eating rapeseed oil. Instead, there are references to oil being used for treating wool. Raw wool is covered with a heavy grease called lanolin, which protects sheep from getting wet. It's easier to remove the lanolin if it has been softened using liquid oil. But this is now an obsolete process, of course. Today, detergents and solvents can be used instead to remove the grease from the wool. We often talk about fats, and these are simply liquid oils which have been cooled below their melting point, below their freezing point. The main component of oils and fats are triacyl glycerols, which are also called triglycerides, although this is officially an obsolete chemical nomenclature. They're compounds built up from a glycerol molecule with 3 fatty acids. Fatty acids consist of a hydrocarbon chain terminating in a carboxyl group. The R in the diagram, if I can get the pointer to work, the R in the diagram represents the hydrocarbon chain, and the COOH is the carboxyl group. Triglycerides are formed by an esterification reaction where glycerol and fatty acids join together with the elimination of water. There are many different types of fatty acids found in oils and fats, ranging from about 8 to at least 22 carbon atoms. The number of carbon atoms is nearly always even, and fatty acids are described according to the number of carbon atoms present. A fatty acid with 18 carbon atoms, which is the most common length, is called a C18 fatty acid. There are also carbon-to-carbon double bonds in fatty acids in various positions and orientations. The number of bonds is indicated in the numbering system, so that the C18-0 is a fatty acid with 18 carbon atoms and 0 double bonds. This is commonly called stearic or stearic acid. C18-1 is a fatty acid with 18 carbon atoms and 1 double bond. The most common variant of a C18 fatty acid is oleic acid, which takes its name from olives, where it is the most common fatty acid present. Oleic acid is also present in varying amounts in all other common oils. Oleic acid is called a monounsaturated fatty acid because the single double bond is not fully saturated with hydrogen atoms. C18-2 and 18-3 acids commonly occur in vegetable oils, and these are called linoleic and linolenic acid, taking their name from linseed, which also provides the fiber that is made into linen. Any fatty acid with 2 or more double bonds is called polyunsaturated, and you'll sometimes see the acronym PUFA, standing for polyunsaturated fatty acids. All fatty acids have systematic UPAC chemical names, and what we are using here are only the so-called trivial or popular names. Natural oils and fats contain a mixture of triglycerides made up of varying amounts of different fatty acids, represented here by the colored bars. So without changing the basic structure, a very large number of combinations are possible. And here we have a table showing the typical fatty acid profile of common oils. Note that both coconut and palm kernel oil have a large proportion of 12-0 or lauric acid. As a result, coconut and palm kernel oil are collectively called lauric oils. Lauric oil from coconut and palm kernel can be used to produce detergent, which is commonly found in personal care products such as shampoo and shower gel. Different oils containing different proportions of different fatty acids have very similar specific heat, density, viscosity, and thermal conductivity. A lot of published data refers to soybean oil, and although other oils are not exactly the same, they are close enough that if you're designing such things as pumps, pipes, and heat exchangers, it's close enough. But oils that have similar properties as liquids have widely differing melting points. Natural oils and fats do not have sharp melting points because they contain mixtures of triglycerides with different melting points. Different oils vary not only in their melting points, but in the temperature range over which they move from solid to liquid. Cocoa butter is notable for changing from solid to liquid over a very narrow temperature range, whereas palm kernel oil contains triglycerides with a wide range of melting points that separate out at room temperature, forming a solid fraction called stearin and a liquid fraction called olin. The process of fractionation exploits this behavior to produce a wide range of products from palm kernel and palm oil and other oils. Oil is cooled at a controlled rate in a crystallizer, then the solid and liquid fractions are separated in a filter. Domestic cooking oil only forms a small part of the market for vegetable oil. Large quantities are used in both solid and liquid form for food manufacture, including baking and confectionery. The use of olive oil in bread making is mentioned in texts thousands of years old, such as in the story of Elijah and the widow of Zarephath, depicted here in this painting by Bernardo Strozzi from 1630. Short-chain fatty acids have lower melting points than longer chain. For example, C18-0 lauric acid has a melting point of 43 degrees Celsius, and C18-0 stearic acid has a melting point of 69 degrees Celsius. Unsaturated fatty acids have lower melting points than saturated ones. C18-1 oleic acid, which has one double bond, has a melting point of 14 degrees Celsius. Linoleic acid with two double bonds has a melting point of -5 degrees Celsius, and C18-3 linolenic acid with three double bonds in a form found in soybean oil has a melting point of -11 degrees Celsius. The melting point of triglycerides reflect the melting point of the fatty acids that they're composed of. So triglycerides that include saturated fatty acids or long chain fatty acids tend to be solid fats, and those including unsaturated and shorter chain acids tend to be liquid. The level of saturation tends to be more important than the chain length, however. Soybean oil, which includes mostly unsaturated C18 fatty acid, remains liquid even at very low temperatures, whereas coconut oil, which includes mostly saturated fatty acids in the range of C10-0 to C16-0 with no double bonds, is partially solid at room temperature. Soybean, canola, sunflower, and similar oils are often known as soft oils as opposed to hard fats. Palm oil, palm kernel oil, and coconut are unsurprisingly called tropical oils. It's likely you'll have heard about trans fatty acids and how they're supposed to be bad for you. The number of double bonds in fatty acids can take one of two configurations, cis and trans. The double bonds in vegetable oils are normally only in the cis configuration. Ruminants such as cows can convert cis fatty acids into trans, and beef naturally contains fat with about 7% of the bonds in the trans configuration. Humans cannot convert cis isomers into trans, but if a mother eats oil containing trans fatty acids, then her milk will contain them as well. But fortunately, I haven't heard of any evidence to suggest that the levels normally found are harmful. Heating oil to high temperatures or reacting it with hydrogen to turn unsaturated oils into saturated ones causes cis acids to turn into trans. The chemical formula of the molecule does not change, but the shape changes dramatically and the melting point rises. C18-12 oleic acid, as we've already seen, has a melting point of 14 degrees Celsius. Changing a single double bond to the trans configuration gives us elaidic acid, which has a melting point of 44 degrees Celsius. In general, trans isomers have higher melting points than the corresponding cis isomers, and they are believed to act in the body in the same way as saturated fats, which is why there's been a move to reduce their formation in vegetable oil processing. Reacting oils with hydrogen in the presence of a catalyst to make unsaturated oils more saturated used to be a very common process for raising the melting point of oils. But at the same time, the unreacted catalyst causes the unreacted sites to change from the cis to the trans configuration, making it possible for partially hydrogenated oil to contain 30 or 40% trans fatty acids. The crystal structure of fats containing high levels of trans isomers gives an ideal texture for some applications, but health fears mean that the process of hydrogenation is used far less today than it used to be. When oils are deodorized at a temperature of about 250 degrees Celsius, a small amount of trans isomers are produced depending on the type of oil and the operating conditions. The very high levels that you sometimes get with hydrogenation never occur, and it's usually possible to keep the final level down below about 1%. Trans isomers form much more easily in polyunsaturated fatty acid chains than monounsaturated ones. We've already seen something of how oil is recovered from palm fruits using equipment specially adapted to that crop. And the olive industry also relies on specialist suppliers. We're now going to look at two types of equipment with more general application, namely high pressure screw presses and solvent extraction. Seeds such as palm kernel, sunflower and rapeseed canola all contain typically about 40 to 50% oil, and a large part of the oil can be expelled in a high pressure press. Before the seed can enter the press, it has to be prepared. There are various types of machine used for the preparation of seeds, and what we see here is only a sample. Usually the seed has to be cleaned of stones, metal and other debris, and then, depending on the type of seed, broken into pieces by cracking rolls or a hammer mill, turned into thin flakes by passing through closely spaced rollers, and finally raised in temperature by a steam heated cooker. Inside the press, also known as an expeller, the seed is moved along and squeezed by a screw or worm assembly. The cage is a heavy casting containing wear-resistant lining bars with a narrow space between them. The worm assembly pushes the seed against the lining bars, causing the oil to flow through gaps. The oil flows into the base of the press. From there, it is processed further to remove small particles of seeds or foots, which are being forced through the gaps in the lining bars. The crushed seed or press cake is extruded from the far end of the machine. When pressing seeds such as rapeseed, canola or sunflower, which typically contain over 40% oil, it's common to only partially remove the oil by pressing, giving a press cake with a little less than 20% oil. This process is known as pre-pressing, and the cake is then reduced to less than 1% oil in a solvent extraction plant. It's also possible to do full pressing, where the percentage of seed oil in the seed is taken down by a press into single figures. It's a much simpler process than solvent extraction, but as you reduce the final oil content, the energy costs rise and the quality of the oil falls. Soybeans only contain about 20% oil, which means that we're starting with an oil content similar to pre-pressed sunflower or canola, and most soybean oil is produced by contacting the prepared seed with solvent without pressing the seed first. The most common solvent used in oil extraction is hexane, which is a molecule containing 6 carbon atoms. It's part of the same series of hydrocarbons that includes butane for gas burners and octane, which is a component of gasoline or petrol, as we call it in the UK. So it's incredibly flammable, and you have to take careful precautions against fires and explosions when using it. Now, you might say that doesn't sound ideal, and why hasn't someone thought of another way? Well, people have looked for other ways, but extracting oil using hexane continues to be very effective, and the safety measures surrounding the process make accidents very rare. In an extractor of a type invented by Jean-Albert Desmet, the prepared seed is carried through the machine on a conveyor belt with narrow slits in it that the liquid can pass through. Fresh hexane enters the end of the machine closest to the discharge, where the seed contains the lowest level of oil. The hexane passes through the seed bed, dissolving the oil. Hexane mixed with oil is called micellar. The micellar is collected and redistributed many times, increasing its oil content, and gradually moves to the feed end of the extractor, where the strongest micellar contacts the unextracted seed in a classic countercurrent application. The same principle can be applied in other configurations, such as the circular extractor and the loop extractor, where the seed is dragged over a fixed screen. In addition to the extractor, there's a system for removing a solvent from the meal called a desolventizer, toaster, dryer, cooler, or DTDC, and a distillation train for removing the solvent from the oil. We shan't look at this in detail, but it's possible to keep the hexane in the meal and oil to very low levels so that nearly all the hexane is recycled and used again. Freshly pressed or extracted oil often has a bad taste and contains oxidation products that affect the stability of the oil. Free fatty acid and phospholipids need to be removed to improve the properties of the oil when used for cooking, and it's also desirable to remove much of the colour as possible because users are not accustomed to seeing dark oil. Free fatty acids are, or FFA, are fatty acids that are not attached to a triglyceride. The free fatty acid level of an oil or free fatty acid of oil in a seed or fruit varies from plant to plant. After harvesting, the level tends to rise as the crop starts to deteriorate, and some are worse than others. Crude soybean oil generally contains less than about 1% free fatty acid, whereas palm oil can easily contain 5%, which quickly rises if the fruit is not harvested or processed in a timely manner. Phospholipids, also called phosphatides or gums, are similar to triglycerides, except that one of the fatty acid chains has been replaced by a phosphorus-containing group. Phospholipids are emulsifiers, which are sometimes used in the form called lecithin in the food industry. If phospholipids remain in the oil, they can form deposits in processing equipment, increase the colour of the finished oil, and lower the smoke point of oil used for frying. The amount of phospholipids in the oil is usually indicated by the phosphorus content, and in fully processed oil it's desirable to have a phosphorus content of less than 1 ppm or parts per million. Oil refining includes some or all of the following steps. Soybean oil and sometimes other oils are mixed with water to dissolve water-soluble gums that are then removed in a centrifugal separator. Insoluble gums, also known as non-hydratable phosphatides, can be removed by treating the oil with acid. After the gums have been reacted with acid, alkali can be added to react with free fatty acid to make soap. The soap and acid gums are then removed in a centrifugal separator. Colour and other impurities. Hang on. Got a problem here. Just a minute. Problem with the pointer is now trapped on the screen. I can't get rid of it. I can't move the
Alan, this is Amy. You can either try hitting enter or click outside of the go to meeting window.
Oh, okay. We've got the that's okay.
Wonderful.
So color and I've got that. So color and other impurities, including oxidized material, are removed by mixing oil with special grades of powdered clay called bleaching earth or bleaching clay, and these are then removed by a filter. Deodorization is achieved by heating the oil and passing steam through it under a vacuum, with the oil under a vacuum, and this produces what's called RBD, or refined bleach deodorized oil. In this context, refined means that the fatty acid has been removed. And if you'll see at the top of the screen here that FAD, this stands for fatty acid distillate. Let's take a more detailed look at neutralization. Alkali, usually in the form of sodium hydroxide solution, also known as caustic soda, reacts with the free fatty acid in the oil to make soap. There are many variations of the process to neutralize oil using alkali, and what we see here is only one of many possible schemes. Acid, usually in the form of citric or phosphoric is mixed into the oil, which is then held in a tank to make the gums more soluble. Alkali is then added to neutralize the fatty acid present and any residual acid from the degumming process. A centrifugal separator removes most of the soap and acidified gums, which forms a mixture called soap stock. Mixing the oil with hot water and then passing it through a second separator washes out most of the remaining soap and gums. Sometimes, especially when processing sunflower oil or rapeseed canola, only the phospholipids are removed in the section that includes the separators, and the free fatty acids are left in the oil to be removed later in the deodorizer. This process, known as acid degumming, is used because it's often more efficient and creates less effluent than neutralization. Acid degumming lines can be very complicated, and there are many variations on what you can see here. Removing fatty acid in the deodorizer from oil that has been acid degummed is known as physical refining. Centrifugal separators used for edible oil processing contain a stack of rapidly spinning inclined discs. Oil enters through holes in the discs where it is acted upon by a force of about 6,000 times the force of gravity. Oil rises into the center of the machine, and the aqueous phase containing soap, gums, and other impurities move to the outside of the bowl. Solid impurities that collect in the bowl, which briefly opens from time to time to release the sludge. Bleaching earth or bleaching clay, historically known as fuller's earth, is prepared from specially selected clay dug out of the ground in various parts of the world. It is a fine powder with a porous structure and electrically polarized sites that various impurities and coloring matter can be adsorbed onto. Oil and clay are mixed together, coloring matter and other impurities are adsorbed onto the clay and then removed in a filter. Bleaching earth collects on the filter leaves, and when the filter is full, the oil is transferred to a clean filter. The cake is then removed from the leaves by a cake vibrator. The cake vibrator is a device driven by compressed air that violently shakes the filter leaves to make the bleaching earth cake fall off. But when some people hear the word cake vibrator, it makes them think of something else completely different. Palm oil contains a much smaller amount of gums than soybean, sunflower, or rapeseed canola oils, which allows them to be processed by a method called dry pretreatment. It's called dry because it doesn't involve the large amounts of liquid or the centrifugal separators required for the wet process. The oil is heated and then reacted with acid. Bleaching clay is added, and the acidulated gums become attached to the clay particles, which are then removed in the filter cake. Most palm oil is treated in this way, but it would not work at all for soft oils. Soybean, sunflower, and rapeseed oil contain hundreds of parts per million of phosphorus, but palm oil and other tropical oils typically contain only about 20 parts per million of phosphorus, which can be easily absorbed into the bleaching earth. The final process in refinery is deodorizing, where the oil is heated to a high temperature, usually between about 220 and 260 degrees Celsius. Steam is injected into the oil, carrying away odor and other volatile components into the headspace, which is maintained at a very low pressure. In this design, steam and oil flow together in a gas lift pump, also known as a mammoth pump. The oil is deflected back into the bath by a conical hat and steam rises up. The lower picture shows the sheet of oil re-entering the bath. The heating of the oil helps to stabilize it and also reduces the color. The vessel is part of a system that includes feeding the oil to the deodorizer, taking it away, recovering fatty matter from the vapor stream, and creating a vacuum. The use of heat recovery and developments in vacuum systems have led to a dramatic reduction in energy consumption of deodorizers in the last few decades, so that the end result is a lightly colored, stable oil with little or no taste and smell. As noted already, this is known as RBD, refined, bleached, and deodorized oil. There are many more things that we could say about how oil gets from the farm into a bottle of cooking oil and how it can be used to make a wide range of other products, but we shall have to leave that for another time. Thank you for joining me on this rapid flight through the world of vegetable oil, and it's now over to you for any questions. And I'll see if I can now escape from the trap I'm in here, because
Thank you, Alan. And if you're trying to get out of your screen, you can just hit escape.
Yeah, you know all the tricks. Nothing's happening at the moment. Anyway, I'm ready to take some questions. If while I wrestle with this, with the technology here, I'm here to answer some questions. But I can't see. Oh, I've done something. Something's happened.
Yes, we are now seeing, I believe, your desktop.
Oh yes, you're seeing something something that shouldn't be seen. Oh, here we go.
And then, so you can just stop sharing screen.
Yeah, I can do that.
And as a reminder to all our participants, if you have any questions, you can enter them into the chat bar to the right, and Alan can take them from there. Oh, it does look like we have one. I accidentally skipped it. And the question is bleaching clay a form of limited resources? How long will it be until we run out of bleaching clay?
Well, I haven't heard of. It's one of the resources. I haven't heard of. There's any kind of major restriction on finding it. It seems to be discovered in quite a lot of parts of the world, and to the best of my knowledge, it's not sort of imminently running out. So I mean, it's something I might be interested to look into. I mean, several other things we're more worried about imminently running out, but as far as I know, your bleaching clay isn't one of them. It's formed from a very common substance, of course, which is clay. Now you have to select exactly the right type of clay, but there's an awful lot of clay about, and even if only a small proportion of clays are the right type, there's still a lot of it there.
I'm scanning through again. I'm actually not seeing any additional questions. No. I'll give everybody a moment or two just in case. No. Oh, there we go. So question, what do they do with it after it is inundated in oil products?
Well, there's various things that are done with bleaching clay. In one plant I worked in China, they were actually mixing it with the powdered coal that they were putting into the boiler, so they were kind of burning the oil that was present in it. It's sometimes just landfilled. It can be incorporated into the meal in solvent plants. So in some plants we have a solvent plant and a refinery together. You can send the bleaching clay back into the solvent plant, and then the bleaching clay ends up as part of the meal that's then fed to chickens.
Okay. The deodorization using the open circuit with cooling tower results in a final product with inferior quality of a system with ice condensing.
Well, so far as the oil's concerned, if you expose it to the same conditions of vacuum and steam, whatever the method used for producing the vacuum doesn't really have any effect on the final product. Now, ice condensing sometimes produces a lower pressure than you get with the open tower system. and it's easier to get a lower pressure. A lot of people feel that that does give some kind of advantage, but the main driver in what deodorize oil is the volume of steam. There's going to be an article in Inform coming up where I talk more about that. But it doesn't, you can't really say that, well, if you're using an open system or ice condensing, that necessarily you're going to get a different quality of oil.
How are random metal molecules removed during refining?
Well, in bleaching is one of the ways in which metal is removed, and the other thing that often happens is in deodorizing, a certain amount of citric acid is added, and citric acid is what's known as a chelating agent, and this grabs hold of the metal ions, which are then filtered out because the citric acid precipitates and then is captured in filters at the outlet of the deodorizing process.
If we can somehow make our energy use very efficient, will it be possible in the future to only press seeds and not to extract the oils anymore?
Well, I did hear, I mean, maybe about sort of 25 years ago, I heard someone talking about this as a great sort of target to say, well, we could press oils all the way down to such a low level that we wouldn't have to use solvent extraction anymore. But and this was from a company that specializes in making presses. But no, I mean, it is quite difficult, and you can only get down to mid to high single figures with pressing. So 5%, 8%, depending on the type of seed, depending on how hard you push, and you can get a lot of oil out of the seeds, particularly on a big scale. I mean, you're looking at these plants in Argentina, which have got huge circular extractors doing 10,000 tons of seed a day, and still the economics are still leaning you heavily towards either using extraction on its own or a combination of pressing and extraction. I do remember a plant in Canada that started up on the basis that they were going to take canola oil and only press it because this was sort of more environmentally desirable than using extraction or something like that, and they went out of business. So there you are. So yeah, I mean, things always change. It's a changing industry, but at the moment, you can't see extracting with solvents going away anytime soon.
Hey, currently not seeing any additional questions. Should you have any, please write them in the chat bar. But I will thank you, Alan and Orain, for the webinar today. I think it was a wonderful topic and, obviously of high interest. We do have a question about how do we download the PowerPoint, and I can actually answer that one. So when the files are all available, they will be posted on Inform Connect as well as with an AOCS, and you will receive, all registrants will receive an email so that you can go directly to download.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll make a PDF which includes all the notes that I've been speaking as well. So there's a full script, and I can make a version for the website that has all of that as well, because some of the pictures on their own don't work without the text. And you can also ask any questions on Inform Connect. I'm often looking at the site, so if there are any questions specifically relating to this this presentation, I can do that.
Thank you. And yes, Alan is the super champion on Inform Connect. And just for everyone's knowledge, it usually takes us about a week to get all the materials together, and you should receive your email next week for everyone registered. So still not seeing additional questions, but as Alan offered, he can take questions on Informed Connect as well. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you for presenting, Alan. And
Thank
I
you.
hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.